started this Mosaic last week, this series last week, by talking about how we live in a very diverse nation, and we live in a very diverse region. We gave a lot of statistics about north central Indiana and how diverse it is in many different ways. And we talked about how diversity is a reality. And I thought that this was going to be kind of a series on diversity, but really it's a series on being united in our differences, loving people that are different from us. And we titled this series Mosaic because of what a mosaic is. As you saw that art piece being made in the video, here's what a mosaic is. The assembly of many different pieces, generally broken, to create a much more beautiful whole. And we said, really, this was what America was established to be, a mosaic of different kinds, creeds, colors. And more than that, this is what the church is called to be, the assembly of many different pieces, always broken to create a much more beautiful whole. And we talked last week about how it is the church's role on earth to bring more heaven down to earth today. Like even the Lord's Prayer, Jesus commanded us. He said, I want you to pray this way. God, your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Like we're not just looking forward to heaven someday. We're about bringing more heaven to earth today. The local church should really be a glimpse of heaven. We'll never get it perfect, but we're working on it. We're working on it. And heaven is going to be this place, as we saw last week in Revelation 7 and Revelation chapter 22. Heaven's going to be this place where every tribe, nation, tongue, and people are together. The perfect mosaic. And here was kind of the big idea last Sunday, what we really wanted to capture as a church. Christ's followers are not looking forward to a day when things that make us different from each other disappear. We look forward to a day when differences don't divide us any longer. And we said if our church doesn't look like heaven, exactly like heaven, then we still have work to do. And we still have some work to do, right? Becoming more diverse and more united in our diversity. So that's where we've been. We're going to get right into week 2. We got a lot of stuff to cover today. So let me just pray for us as we go into this. God, so excited for today in kind of how you're using this talk. Even more excited for how you're using our church to make a difference in our city and in our county and the surrounding communities. If revolution was removed, what would change in our city? And I think a lot. So thank you for what you're doing through this movement of people. Guide us through this day and what you have for us. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, in 17 days, I'm going to be celebrating 36 journeys around the sun. And my wife, she actually turns 37 today. So for 17 days, she's 2 years older than me, which is great. I tease her all 17 days about that. But in those 36 years, I've never seen anything quite like the cultural climate we're living in right now. But again, as I said last week, what breaks my heart is not necessarily that. What's compelled us to do this series, and specifically today's message, is that Christ's followers are getting caught up in the division. We're not really looking much different than the general culture. And the cross-cultural word that we're going to talk about today, if you saw the title of the message, it's the cross-cultural word. The word we're going to talk about today, it's just as much absent in the church as it is outside the church. And here's a pretty good gauge for your faith. If you want to, like, how am I doing with this following Jesus thing? Here's a good question to ask. Are you standing out? Am I standing out? Does my life and the way I interact with people look different? Does it look different than the majority? Because if we don't stand out, that is prime time to revisit what Jesus calls us to. And for those of you maybe today that haven't yet decided to follow Jesus, like maybe you're here because a Jesus follower begged you to come and they're like, just come. I know you don't believe everything we believe, but you just got to come. You got to check it out. You'll fit right in. Don't worry about what you believe right now. And that's so true. We're so glad you're here, whether you believe about the whole Jesus thing or not. And you're gonna love this message if you're not a Christ follower, and specifically if you were brought by a Christ follower, and maybe you're going to go get lunch later or something. You're going to love this message because you're going to be able to look at that Christ follower and be like, man, you should be doing more of that stuff that he was talking. Because like what we're going to read today, what we're going to talk about is specifically for Jesus followers. Like for those that don't follow Christ or haven't made that step yet, this is kind of like if you follow this, it'll make your life better. It really will make a difference in your relationships in your life. For Jesus followers, we better be living more like this because this is the Jesus way. So, and the cross-cultural word that I think it's not quite extinct, but it's definitely endangered in our culture, and more specifically the church, is this word. And I'm going to let Peter, the Apostle Peter, give it to us. 1 Peter 2:17. And help me out with the two underlined words, okay? He says, show proper respect to everyone. Let's try it one more time. That was good. Let's try it one more time. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the family of believers, fear God, honor the emperor. And that's today's word. We're going to talk about respect. Because respect is the glue of the Mosaic. Showing proper respect to everyone. This is the glue of the Mosaic. And here's what's so interesting about this verse. Like, if I had you read all the gospel stories of Jesus, and like all his interactions with the 12 disciples, and then I had you read this verse and guess which of the 12 disciples wrote this verse, your last guess would be Peter. Like, I mean, if you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and all these stories and all these things where Peter talked and interacted, all this, and then I said, hey, guess who wrote this verse right here? Peter would be your last guess. Or at least your next to last guess, because you would have read Judas went out and hung himself, so Judas was no longer there. So maybe your 11th guess out of the 12 would be Peter. Because, I mean, when you read stories of Peter in the Gospels, you would never think of Peter saying something like this. Peter was a reactor. I mean, Jesus, at the end of the book of John, Jesus has to heal a guy's ear because Peter just reacted and cut this dude's ear off. Which I've always thought, you got to be really good with a sword to just get the ear, right? I mean, that's pretty incredible, but don't try that. But, I mean, Peter, he was all about Peter. There's even this one story where Peter's being so selfish and self-centered that Jesus has to look at Peter and he goes, get behind me, Satan. You know you're having a bad day when Jesus has to say something like that to you. So, I mean, Peter said stuff without thinking quite often. Almost every story where he's mentioned in Scripture, he's sticking his foot in his mouth with some sort of statement or off-the-wall thing. But now it's a couple decades removed from the Gospels, from the resurrection, and Peter is this transformed rock of a man that says, respect everyone, show proper respect to everyone. Do you know what kind of maturity and emotional strength it takes to live this out? Respect everyone. And there's no contingencies placed on it. It's not like respect everyone if they, or respect everyone when they, or respect everyone that lives like this or does this. No, it's just respect everyone. Show proper respect to everyone. And to respect someone, it means to value someone. To value someone. And the act of respecting, as you know, it does not come naturally, right? This is very counterintuitive. This is very against our nature. If you want proof of that, just hang around some kids for a little while. Kids do not naturally show respect, right? I mean, at least my kids, like, if they want something from their sibling, they just take it. They don't care about what the other one thinks, you know. And there's all kinds of stories I could share. Like, respecting, it's a learned behavior. That's what I'm saying. And what I want to do today is I want to give us 10 ways to be a person that respects everyone. 10 ways to kind of live this verse that is given to us by the Apostle Peter. And some of you, you're already thinking, as I say 10 ways, you're like, okay, hold up. Like Anthony usually gives like a 30 to 35 minute message. He gives us like one thing, like one or two things. How in the world is he going to get through 10 things in 35 minutes? Well, let me tell you this. If your mind works like a calculator and you're already trying to figure out, okay, that's about 3 minutes per item, it's not going to work that way, okay? Some of these things I'm going to go way longer, and you're going to be like, man, if he goes that long on all 10, we're never going to get out of here. It's going to be Thanksgiving before we leave. So we're going to dive deep with some. We're just going to hit some of the other ones. So we've given you a handout because you can't remember 10 things, right? So you got a handout with you. By the way, does anybody need a pen? Our usher team is ready to serve you. If you need a pen, just keep your hand up for a minute. They're going to come around right now. Just keep them up till you get that pen. And as they're coming around, just a couple things. There's going to be some blanks that you fill in. And my encouragement would be, take this with you, like, and walk through it. Like, if you're in a life group, talk these things out with your life group. Maybe this would be a really good thing to do. Like, judge how you're doing. Kind of rate how you're doing on each one on a scale of 1 to 10. And then what's one thing I could do to kind of move up the scale in this one area right here? Talk about this with your spouse. Maybe hit all 10 of these things, one every day with the kids, with the family over the next 10 days. So, 10 ways to respect everyone. We've got a few pens coming around still. You guys ready for this? You better be ready. It's going to be tough for me and for you. Okay, let me just give us the first one. Here's the first one. Number one, respectful people understand that every person you encounter is made in the image of God. Image goes in that first blank. Now, I want you to write it down and then just look back up here because this is big. You've never locked eyes with another person that is not ridiculously loved by God. You'll never run into a human being on planet Earth that Jesus did not shed his blood for. The worst person you know, or I know, think about this. Just let this sink in. The worst person you know is one prayer away from being your eternal brother or sister. The worst person you can think of in your mind right now, and some of us, you already got names, like, oh yeah, the worst person you can think of, one prayer away from spending eternity with you. The person that doesn't think like you, act like you, look like you, whatever, an image bearer of God. This is going to be hard today, okay? Which means the person that watches Fox News for their current events is an image bearer of God. The person that watches CNN to get their information is an image bearer of God. Hang on, it's going to get harder. Presidential supporters and presidential bashers are all made in the image of God. Colin Kaepernick, made in the image of God. Hold on to your chair for this one. This one's going to be really hard. Brace yourself. Bill Belichick. You don't have to like him. Made in the image of God. Now, he does not have the style of God. He's got them cut-off sweatshirts. I don't know what he's doing, but he's made in the image of God. I was listening to iHeartRadio this week, and the breaking news came through that Charles Manson was in critical condition. You probably heard something about this. Charles Manson was a cult leader, mass murderer in the late 60s. Did horrific things. And as I heard the news, I'm preparing this message at the same time. As I heard the news, I just prayed right in the moment. God, help him make things right with you before it's too late. Because even Charles Manson was made in the image of God. And that's an extreme example, okay? We're not running into Charles Mansons every day, hopefully, okay? The people we're tempted to disrespect are probably not serving life sentences in prison. We're just encountering people that are different from us. In the midst of encountering people that are different from us, if we can just take a minute, think about this. If we can just take a minute in the midst of our emotion and irritation and how they rub us the wrong way or whatever it might be, and we can just think, man, God breathed life into them and stamped his image on their body and their soul. If we can just think that thought, we can learn to respect anyone. I mean, who are we to withhold respect from a person Jesus died for? Any person you connect with, encounter, see on television, hear on the radio, that's holding up that protest sign that looks different, thinks different, drives different, hello. The people who don't look like us, act like us, vote like us, whatever, all matter to God. They are made in his image. Nothing's more important than that we're going to talk about today. That's number one, made in his image. Number two, respectful people differ without demonizing. Respectful people differ without demonizing. Respectful people can have spirited debates, lively debates, without having to draw blood. By the way, that's our kids' ministry over there, having a blast. If you're new to Revolution, they're rocking it out over in the room next door. But again, respectful people could differ without demonizing. They can hold strong differences of opinion while still showing proper respect to everyone. And let me reiterate again, this is learned behavior. This is intentional stuff. Like, this goes against our nature. At the Global Leadership Summit this year, Bill Hybels, and the Global Leadership Summit is something we encourage revolutionaries to go to every year. I think we took 40-some people from Cass County this year. But Bill Hybels, he's the pastor of Willow Creek Community Church. He was giving his talk, and he told a story of this time where he witnessed Condoleezza Rice in action. And Condoleezza Rice is the first black woman to serve as United States National Security Advisor, as well as the first black woman to serve as U.S. Secretary of State. She served under President George W. Bush. She was born on November 14th, 1954 in Birmingham, Alabama, which oddly enough, November 14th was the day I was typing this story out, which was her birthday. It was interesting. But she grew up in the segregated South. And she talks about how she learned so much about respect from her upbringing, a lot of what not to do, how not to respect. And Charisma Magazine did an article on Condoleezza just a few years ago. If you search in Google the faith of Condoleezza Rice, it's the first thing that popped up for me. Incredible article. It's called The Quiet Faith of Condoleezza Rice. Great next step if you want to read that. But back to the story Bill Hybels was telling. He said he witnessed these two men debate her position on an issue. And he said the debate started politely enough, but soon the men went from disagreeing to devaluing her personally, and then later on to demonizing her in this public forum. And the words got louder and louder, and their behavior got lower and lower, he said. And it wasn't about the issue anymore. Now they were demonizing her as a person. And through this whole thing, Condoleezza Rice maintained her composure, and when she finally broke in to share her point, she started in a normal tone. That's important. We'll talk about that in a minute. She started in a normal tone, not sarcastic, not a raised voice, and she said, "Gentlemen, with all due respect." And as Hybels was telling this story, he says, "I learned so much from watching her respond in this setting." And he explained how whenever he starts to feel emotion welling up or anger starting to rise up, he just takes a breath now, and he chimes in softly, "Excuse me, with all due respect." And I love this part of the story. Hybels talked about how years later he met Condoleezza Rice, and he was able to talk about how that moment where he saw her in action just changed the trajectory of kind of how he handles things like that. And when he told the story, Condoleezza said, "It's funny, I use that phrase as a 2-second timeout prayer to help me stay respectful even when others are not." So maybe the next time you're in a spirited debate or the next time you're in an argument with your spouse and the emotion's starting to rise up, it's getting a little out of hand, you'll just stop and chime in, "Excuse me, with all due respect." And the other person will just laugh because you just said that to your spouse. It'll be great. It'll change the whole tone of the argument. So again, respectful people can differ without demonizing. Number three. Respectful people believe the best about others. 1 Corinthians 13:7, it says, "Love believes the best." Love believes the best. See, believing the best, it changes the dialogue in your head about people. And it helps us respond better, respond in a respectful, loving way. I found out this week that a rumor has been going around about Revolution. And I'm not going to say what the rumor was or who we found out about the rumor from or anything like that. I still don't even know where it started. I'm not going to trace it back. I mean, it's outside the church where it came to us from. So it's just a rumor was spread about something I said from stage. It was totally flipped around. Like what I said was completely flipped, and what was being spread was the opposite of actually what I said, which is probably another great reason we video our Sundays and podcasts and stuff like that. But my first reaction when I heard about this rumor was to think, man, someone's trying to take us down. I mean, they hate God, they hate Revolution, and I was starting to imagine a person with like horns sticking out of their head. Possibly the Antichrist himself had started this rumor about Revolution Church. But that's a horrible place to be in, because when I'm thinking that way about a human being made in the image of God, when I'm thinking that way, guess what I'm not doing? Praying for them. Guess what I'm tempted to do? The exact same thing to them that they're doing to me. And I still don't even know who it was, so I don't know how to necessarily spread a rumor about them when I don't know. But when I started to think differently, like, okay, maybe what I said just came out confusing to some person at some point, and hopefully maybe that person that maybe originated it will come to me at some point and talk to me. God, I just pray that like whatever's going on in this person's heart and mind, that they would stop talking bad about Revolution and point that energy to something positive. Because when we believe the worst, we create this horrible narrative of a person that often doesn't even exist. When we believe the best, again, I can see someone as God created, and possibly they're just hurt or confused about something. When I believe the best, I don't read that email on Monday morning as someone's trying to hurt me or hurt the church. And I can start to do what God calls us to do. Pray for those that despitefully use you. Believing the best, it changes our response. It changes our relationships. It's a much better place to live in. It helps us show proper respect to everyone. Number 4, respectful people don't interrupt and dominate conversations. I'm sure some of us have perfected this one, but I'll talk about it anyway. That's a joke. If we're going to be a Mosaic church, and learn and grow from our diversity, multi-generational, multicultural, multi-ethnic, this right here is huge. And James, the brother of Jesus, he gives us kind of like the how-to verse of this. Here's what he says about this. He says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires." See, respectful people want to hear the thoughts and opinions of others more than they want to make a point. It's a way to put others first, especially people that don't disagree with us. It's a way to put them first, to serve them. And a really simple way to help with this: when you're talking with someone that has a different opinion or ideology than yourself, instead of responding with, "Well, here's what I think," or "Here's why you're wrong," instead try something like, "Well, let me hear why do you believe that?" Or "Tell me a little bit more about that. Like, is there something in your life that kind of relates to that belief? Or tell me a little bit more." Make your number one goal in conversations to be understanding where the other person's coming from, and your secondary goal to be, getting your point out. So much more growth happens when we respect each other and respect each other's differences. Don't interrupt and dominate conversation. Number 5, respectful people guard their volume levels and word choices. And I love Proverbs 15, verse 1. This is such a simple yet, I guess, deep, profound verse. Here's what it says: "A gentle answer deflects anger." Deflects anger. What this verse is saying is, controlling our tone of voice and our volume not only stops anger. Check this out. It doesn't just stop the anger, it deflects it. It causes positive emotion to enter the conversation and the relationship. Because deflect, it means to change directions, to flip it, right? To redirect it. Being gentle in our responses, being gentle in our conversation can cause what would be a yell it out fest to be a hug it out at the end talk. It can totally flip what could potentially happen. Something that could break the relationship could literally take the relationship to the next level. Because a gentle answer, it deflects anger, it flips it. And let me just tell you, our church board, and I didn't get permission to share this, but because we respect each other, I know that the board members in the room will take this the right way. Our church board has had some heated debate over decision-making for Revolution. And if you talk to any of them, they would, yes, that is true. And there are times where one person's over here and one person's all the way over here. It happens. Our board is a mosaic of thought, let me just tell you. And sometimes in one meeting, there's not much moving in each other's directions in one meeting. But we have such high respect for each other that we watch our tones, our volume levels, the relationships stay intact, and we grow through it, and better decisions are made for our church because of it. And I can say unequivocally, if it wasn't for our mosaic board, we would have paid more than $375,000 for the building down the street we're going to be moving into next year. It's a fact. It took some heated stuff. It took back and forth to get to a place where we knew what the next step was. And we knew what the next step was, and God directed it. It took a mosaic that was willing to say, we're going to guard our volume, our word choices, we're going to respect each other. People that follow Proverbs 15:1, they decide, I'm going to avoid certain tones of voice and certain phrasing in my vocabulary forever. It's just, there's no justifying it. It's just not good. It's not helpful. I'm going to stay away from it. I'm going to stop using this word to describe this type of person. I'm going to stop using certain phrasing when I'm angry. Because friends, listen, we are living in the lowest level of public discourse imaginable. And let me be clear on this. The scriptures are our guide in this area. Politics and media should never be a model for how you and I respond and interact with each other. And that is not a partisan statement, that is a kingdom statement. We are called to follow Jesus and only Jesus, not politics, not the media. And the Scriptures are our guide on this. And the Scriptures express to us this. And I wish we could put this on a billboard in every single town in America right now. This verse right here in Ephesians 4. It says, don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good and helpful so that, let's read this part, so that your words will be an encouragement. That was awful. Let's try it again. So that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. And by the way, this is not the anti-cuss word verse. This is the don't use words that hurt others verse. Don't use words that hurt, use words that help. Don't abuse others with your words. Encourage others with your words. Don't just avoid bad words. Use words like ways of speaking that's different than out there in the culture. That builds, that encourages. And if we don't constantly reflect on what God says about this, we're going to get sucked into the vortex. Because see, news networks are all about ratings. And what gets ratings? Division, divisive language, shaming, name-calling, sin. It just does. Don't get sucked into it. And do you know how we become more of an Ephesians 4:29 church? It happens when the person sitting in your seat decides to live this way. And it happens when the person standing on this stage decides to live this way. It happens one person at a time, one family at a time, one church at a time. Take all of your words. This covers social media too, by the way. All of your words, and run it through the filter of good and helpful. Number 6. You're still here. Awesome. We're going to keep going. Okay. Respectful people are courteous. And that's just a fill in the blank. No exposition needed. Be polite and courteous. Respectful people are courteous. Number 7. Respectful people refuse to stereotype others. Refuse. We just don't do it. We don't group people together in a negative way and label them. We value people. We see everyone as a unique individual, one of a kind, made by God. This is a really big part of today. 1 Samuel 16, verse 7, God speaks through a prophet named Samuel. He says, man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the, anybody know? Heart, I heard it. Yeah, man looks at the outward appearance. God looks at the heart. God knows everything about us. God can see the deepest part of us. God knows who we really are. We don't have that luxury. If we get to know someone over time, yes, someone's heart starts to surface a little bit. We can start to peer into someone's heart a little bit, but we'll never know someone's heart completely. How could we possibly know enough to stereotype someone? And do you know who we usually stereotype? People that are different from us. People that don't look like us, don't think like us, don't have what we have, don't wear what we wear, whatever it might be. And the way to get over a stereotype, you want to know how to get over a stereotype? Get to know the people you're stereotyping. Because it's never exactly the way we think. All right, number 8. Number 8. Respectful people confess things they do wrong quickly. I'm sorry, forgive me. We add that last 2 words there. I'm sorry, forgive me. That's it. We're not going to. We see our flaws first, confess things quickly. Respectful people form opinions carefully. Man, this is a tough one. Let me just give us another powerfully practical proverb. Try to say that 10 times real fast. Proverbs 18, it says, fools, this is pretty intense. Fools have no interest in understanding. They only want to air their own opinions. And by the way, that is me in my 20s right there. That is Anthony in his 20s. Forming opinions quickly is foolish. That's what it's saying. Form opinions slowly. Because life is complex. Life is like a 3-dimensional web of stuff, right? And here's another thing that plays into this, and a lot of Christians don't like to admit this, but this is true. The Bible does not read as a black and white instruction guide for every little decision we'll ever make in life. It just doesn't. I've heard people say, and I've even heard Christians say before, I wish it did. I wish the Bible had exactly what it said exactly, if I'm in this exact scenario and this is my options right here, that it said exactly what I should do in everything. That's a horrible idea. You know how long the Bible would be if it did? It'd be billions of pages long and nobody'd ever read it. You'd be so confused to even know what to do. But because life is so complex, people's stories are so complex, people's lives are so complex. And we think in our culture everything is simple and Googleable. That's not a word. It's not. Like we retweet and share these clever little phrases on social media and these 1-minute videos of some dude in the backseat of his car making a vlog of, like, he answers this massive question in 1-minute video. Come on, dude. You didn't think about this or this or this. I mean, this is going on in my life. Life is complex, right? Form opinions carefully. God might not shine light on an entire situation in a specific moment. From my experience, he usually doesn't. Sometimes the best thing we can do is just sit on something and give God time to speak. Form opinions slowly, carefully. Number 10, respectful people live out the whole verse. Whole verse. And you're like, what verse? We've looked at a lot of them. Well, let's go back to the first one. Let's go back to the first one. This is where we started the journey right here. Remember the Apostle Peter, he said, show proper respect to everyone, love the family of believers, fear God, honor the emperor. And we can just read through that. We don't realize how intense of a statement that those last 3 words are. Because see, the first century Christ followers were persecuted terribly by the emperor. After Rome burned to the ground in 53 AD, Emperor Nero, he falsely accused Christians of starting the fire in Rome and called for the arrest and killing of all Christians based on their hatred toward humanity. That was his phrase. That was his lie. Because of Christians' hatred toward humanity, they only be arrested and killed. So those who professed Christ were rounded up, locked up, crucified, beheaded, sacrificed, dipped in oil, set on fire, mauled by animals in the Colosseum. It was a life or death decision to follow Christ in Rome. And having this context, listen, it is extremely convicting to read the words from Peter, a guy that was crucified for his faith in Christ. Honor the emperor. I guarantee you there were people back in the first century thinking, why would we ever honor the emperor who is clearly an evil maniac with the goal of exterminating all Christians? But they did it. But Peter wrote this because of something Jesus, their leader, said. They knew that with what Jesus had taught them, being his follower meant honor the emperor, the very person that is trying to kill us. What was that thing Jesus taught? That's what we're going to talk about next week. Next week's going to be the hardest week of this series. Don't miss it.